My daughter-in-law said, "You'll die broke." She was sitting in my $12 million house when she said it, on my cream-colored sofa, holding a glass of my wine, looking at me like I was a stain on her shoe. And the worst part, the part that still makes my hands shake when I think about it, is that she said it smiling. "Before I tell you what I did about it, I want to know a little about you, because a story like this feels different when I know who I'm telling it to. So type it in the comments right now. Tell me your name. Tell me what city you're watching this from, and tell me your age too. Because I read every single one of them, I do so. And if you love your grandma, if you have a grandmother who raised you upright, then do an old woman a favor and hit that like button. Subscribe if you haven't already, and share this with somebody who needs to hear it. Now let me tell you what happened in my house. My name is Adele Winthrop. I am 71 years old, and I live in Highland Park, Texas, in a house I built with my own 2 hands, my own mind, and 40 years of my life. I did not marry into this money. I did not inherit it from some uncle I never met, some distant relative whose name I would barely recognize at a family reunion. I built an interior architecture firm from a card table in a 1-bedroom apartment into a company that designed lobbies for banks, ballrooms for hotels, and yes, eventually my own home, a home worth $12 million, sitting on 4 acres with a view that makes grown men go quiet. I still remember that card table, if you can believe it. A wobbly little thing with a bent leg I propped up with a folded matchbook, sitting in the corner of a 1-bedroom apartment that smelled like the diner too. Floors down no matter how many candles I burned. I drew my first floor plans on that table by lamplight after Patrick went to sleep, because during the day, I was answering phones at a real estate office just to keep the lights on, and at night I was teaching myself everything I could about proportion, light and space, because nobody was going to teach it to me, and nobody was going to hand me a career either. My own mother used to say hard work is the only inheritance nobody can ever take from you, and I have carried that sentence with me through every single year since, through every client who doubted a young single mother could handle a commercial contract, through every banker who wanted a man's signature on a loan before mine was good enough on its own. I do not tell you this to brag about what I built, though I suppose at 71, I have earned the right to be a little proud of it. I tell you because I want you to understand exactly what it means when a woman who built her whole life out of that wobbly card table hears someone who never had to fight for a single square foot of anything tell her, in the very house that hard work built, that she is going to die broke. It does not just sting like an insult. It lands like a small earthquake, because it threatens to erase in one careless sentence 40 years of nights I stayed up drawing by lamplight instead of sleeping. Let me tell you a little about this house, because I think it matters to the rest of what I'm about to share. It has 8 bedrooms, though only 3 of them are ever really used these days. A kitchen with 2 islands, because I could never decide which one I liked better, so I simply had them build both. A library with a rolling ladder. I still climb myself, even though Patrick begs me to let him do it. And a back terrace that looks out over 4 acres of land I planted myself, tree by tree over 20 years, so that by the time I was old enough to sit and enjoy the shade, the oaks would finally be tall enough to give it. There's a pool Jack has spent every summer of his life in, a Gawi pond he named every single fish in when he was 7, and a garage that still holds, tucked in the back corner, the very first drafting table I ever owned, the one I upgraded from that wobbly card table the year my firm landed its first hotel contract. I do not keep that table there for sentimentality alone. I keep it there so that every single day, when I pull my car in, I have to walk past it, and I have to remember exactly what it cost me to get from there to here. I have one son, only one, Patrick. He is a good boy, even now. Even at 44 years old, he is still my boy. And I love him the way only a mother who raised a son alone can love him. His father left when Patrick was 6, And I did not have time to fall apart, so I did not fall apart. I worked, I built, and I raised Patrick to be kind, to be humble, to remember where he came from. Then he married Jenna Holcomb. I want to be fair here, because I am not a woman who speaks cruelty just to speak it. When Patrick brought Jenna home the first time, I tried. I really did try. She was pretty, she was polished. She said all the right things at dinner, complimenting the roast, asking about the recipe as though she planned to make it herself one day. She complimented my china. She asked about my company like she was interested, leaning forward in her chair, nodding at all the right moments. I told myself, this is what love looks like sometimes. A little performance at first, and then it softens into something real. It did not soften. It sharpened. Over the years, I watched Jenna look at my house the way a woman looks at a dress in a shop, window she cannot afford, except she could afford it, because she married into it, or she believed she had. I watched her run her fingers along my marble countertops and ask, so casually, so sweetly, Adele, when you're gone, does all this go to Patrick? Or is there some kind of trust thing? I watched her bring her friends over for lunch and give them tours of my home like it was already hers, gesturing at my art, my furniture, my life's work, saying, and this will be ours one day. I let it go. For years I let it go, because my grandson Jack is the light of my entire life. And Jack is Jenna's son too. And I did not want to be the mother-in-law who causes trouble, who makes Christmas dinners tense, who makes her son choose sides. So I smiled. I poured the wine. I let her touch my things. But that one afternoon, I will never forget as long as I live. Jenna went too far. It was a Sunday. Patrick was at the store getting more ice for the party we were hosting for Jack's 12th birthday. Jack was outside in the pool with his friends, laughing, splashing, the sound of a happy child filling my backyard. I was in the kitchen arranging a fruit tray when Jenna walked in, poured herself a glass of my Bordeaux without asking, the way she always did, and sat down on my sofa like she owned it, crossing her legs, settling in comfortably as though the cushions themselves belonged to her already. Adele, she said, swirling the wine in her hand, can I be honest with you about something? She tilted her head slightly, as though preparing to deliver something profound. I said, of course, dear, because that is what you say, always. I worry about you sometimes, she said, and she had this look on her face, this look of fake concern that I have come to recognize the way you recognize a storm, cloud before the rain hits. You're 71. You still work like you're 40. You give money to every charity that calls you. You still pay for Jack's private school out of your own pocket instead of letting Patrick handle it. At the rate you're going, Adele, honestly, you'll die broke. She said it so lightly, like she was commenting on the weather, like she hadn't just told me in my own home, in the house I built with my own hands, that she believed I was throwing away money that should have already belonged to her. I stood there with a strawberry in my hand, and I did not say a word. I smiled at her. I said, is that right? And I went back to arranging the fruit tray. My hands did not shake while I arranged that fruit. I want you to know that. 40 years in business teaches a woman how to keep her hands steady when her insides are anything but. I have sat across conference tables from men who tried to talk me out of contracts. I had already won fair and square. I have stood in front of city council, members who assumed the woman in the room was somebody's assistant, rather than the owner of the firm. And I learned a long time ago that the moment you let your face show what your heart is doing, you have already lost. So I arranged the strawberries in a slow spiral around the edge of that silver tray, the way I always do, and I listened to Jenna hum some pop song under her breath while she scrolled through her phone on my sofa. And outside the window I could hear Jack laughing in the pool. That big open laugh only a 12-year-old boy who does not yet know the world can be cruel is capable of making. And something inside me quietly, permanently, closed a door. I did not slam it. I did not even let her hear it shut. I simply understood. standing there with juice from a strawberry staining my fingertips, that the version of myself who had spent years excusing this woman's little comments, telling myself again and again she surely did not mean it that way, telling myself Patrick loved her and that had to count for something. That version of me was done being useful to anyone. Not to Jenna, not to my own comfort, not even to the fantasy of a peaceful family. I had been quietly protecting for years at the cost of my own dignity. Something in me changed in that exact moment. Something in me went very still and very cold and very clear. Because here is what Jenna Holcomb did not know. Here is what nobody in my family knew, not even my own son. I had spent the last 2 years quietly, carefully restructuring everything. Not because I suspected Jenna specifically, not at first, but because any smart businesswoman protects what she built. And I have always been a smart businesswoman. I had a private meeting once a month with my attorney, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Corinne Blackwood, silver-haired, 60 years old herself, with a corner office downtown and a reputation for representing exactly one kind of client, women who had built something significant and needed someone equally sharp to help them keep it. And together we had been building something, a plan, a structure, a fortress around everything I owned, brick by legal brick, with very specific doors that would only open for very specific people, under very specific conditions. I had no idea, sitting there with that strawberry in my hand, just how soon I would need that fortress. Let me tell you a little about how a woman like me builds something like that, because I think it matters to understanding why I was not about to let anyone, not Jenna, not anyone, walk into my life and casually decide what I had earned belonged to them. Corinne and I did not start with a plan to protect the house. We started 2 years earlier, at a much simpler dinner, just the two of us at a quiet restaurant downtown, where I told her I was tired of feeling like my own future was a topic other people discussed at parties I was not invited to. I had heard secondhand, through a cousin who had heard it from someone at church, that there had already been whispered conversations at a baby shower about what happens to Adele's house. Eventually, I was 69 years, old at the time, sharp as a tack, running my company 4 days a week. And people were already dividing up my furniture in their heads. So Corinne and I got to work, quietly, deliberately. We reviewed every asset I owned, the house, the firm, my investment accounts, a small commercial property downtown I had purchased in the 90s for almost nothing and watched quadruple in value. We talked about what I wanted my legacy to actually look like, not what other people assumed it should look like. We talked about Jack, about the kind of future I wanted to hand him. Not a lump sum that would disappear into somebody else's bad decisions, but something structured, something protected, something that would still be standing long after I was gone. And piece by piece, meeting by meeting, we built a trust that was not just generous, but armored. Armored against exactly the kind of behavior I did not yet have proof Jenna was engaging in, but that some old, careful part of me had already started to suspect. I did not build that fortress because I hated my daughter-in-law. I built it because I have lived long enough to know that love, real love, the kind that lasts through decades and disappointments alike, does not need locked doors between people. And when I started to feel like I needed locked doors in my own home, I trusted that feeling enough to act on it long before I had a single strawberry-stained fact to back it up. Over the next few weeks, I started paying attention in a way I had not allowed myself to before. I stopped explaining away the little comments. I stopped telling myself I was being paranoid, or too sensitive or unfair to my son's wife. I started watching, really watching, with the same eyes I used to spot a bad contractor trying to cut corners on a job, or a client trying to squeeze free work out of my firm. I have built a 40-year career on reading people, and I turned that skill, finally fully, on Jenna Holcomb. Once I started truly watching, I saw a pattern I had been too polite, or too tired, or too hopeful to see before. Jenna had a way of asking questions. That sounded like care, but were really reconnaissance. Adele, do you still drive yourself to your appointments? Or does someone take you? Adele, who has the spare key to the house besides Patrick. Just curious in case of emergencies. Adele, you should really let me help you go through your closet. Some of these things are so old. I bet half of what's valuable in here you don't even remember you have, said while her eyes moved not to my closet, but to the small safe in the corner of it that held my grandmother's jewelry and the original deed to this house. She began showing up more often when Patrick was at work, always with a reason that sounded generous on its surface. A casserole, always chicken and rice, always in a dish she asked me to return clean, as though she needed the excuse to come back for it. A magazine article about senior safety in the home that she left, ever so casually, on my kitchen counter, dog-eared to a page about home care agencies. An offer to help me set up online banking properly that involved her sitting at my computer far longer and asking far more specific questions about account numbers and beneficiary designations than any simple tech tutorial required. Each visit alone would have meant nothing. Strung together, they formed the unmistakable shape of a woman conducting an inventory. She had also started, I noticed, being unusually kind to me in front of other people. At church, at the grocery store when we happened to run into her old college friends, she would take my arm and say things like, I just worry about her so much. She works too hard for a woman her age. I keep telling Patrick we need to have a real conversation about her care. Her voice dripping with a concern so performative, it made the hair on my arm stand up because I have given enough presentations in my life to recognize when someone is building a narrative for an audience, rather than simply living inside a true one. What I found once Corinne's team started digging made my blood run cold. It started small. I noticed Jenna had started coming to my house on days Patrick was at work, always with some excuse, always so warm, always so eager to just check on me, or bring over a casserole, or help me organize my files, Adele. You know how disorganized you get. I let her help. I let her sit at my desk in my study while I made tea, telling myself I was being a good mother-in-law, telling myself this was simply what closeness looked like between two women who loved the same man. And one afternoon, when I came back into the room a few minutes earlier than she expected, my footsteps quiet on the hallway runner, I saw her standing over my open filing cabinet with her phone held up, photographing documents one after another with the quick, practiced motion of someone who had done this before. Bank statements, property deeds, the folder where I kept old correspondence with my attorney, the one with Corinne's letterhead visible. At the top of the page, she was capturing when I stepped into the doorway. She startled at the sound of me, actually jumped a little, her phone nearly slipping from her hand, and laughed it off too quickly. Too brightly said she was just taking a picture of a recipe card she'd found, tucked in among the papers. Wasn't that funny? She'd been meaning to try it. There was no recipe card in that drawer. There never had been, and we both, I think, understood in that silent, charged moment that we each knew exactly what the other one knew, even as we smiled and pretended otherwise. I said nothing. I smiled. I poured the tea, my hands steady, my mind already 3 steps ahead, already reaching for the phone to call Corinne the moment Jenna's car pulled out of my driveway. But that night I called Corinne. I remember standing in my kitchen with the phone pressed to my ear, the party long over, the last of the balloon string still tied to my porch railing, and I remember how strange my own voice sounded to me, calm on the outside, trembling somewhere underneath, the way it used to sound when I was a young widowed mother calling the bank to ask, again politely, if there was any flexibility on a payment I could not make that month. She's moving, I told her. I don't know exactly what she's planning, but she's moving. Corinne, bless her, did not waste time being shocked. She has been my attorney for 11 years, and my friend for nearly as long, and she has seen this exact story unfold in 100. Different living rooms across this city. Families circling an aging parent's assets like sharks smelling blood in the water, dressed up in casseroles and Sunday visits and just checking in on you. Adele, this is not new, she told me. This is one of the oldest stories there is. A person builds something real, and somebody who never had to sacrifice for it decides. They're entitled to walk in and take it. And they usually dress the taking up as concern. I need you to not panic, and I need you to not confront her yet. Because right now you have a feeling, and feelings don't hold up in front of a judge. We need facts. Adele, she said, we need to find out exactly what she is building toward before she builds it. Do you trust Jack? I said with my whole heart, yes. Jack was 12 years old, and he loved his grandmother. The way children love the person who never once makes them feel small. He spent every other weekend at my house. He knew where things were kept. And children, God love them. They hear everything, even when the adults think they are not listening. I did not ask Jack to spy for me. I want to be clear about that, because I have never once used that sweet child as a tool. Not even against a woman like Jenna, but children tell you things unprompted. Especially when they are worried, and a week later, Jack climbed up onto the stool at my kitchen island while I made him a grilled cheese sandwich, and he said very quietly, Grandma, is something wrong with your brain? I nearly dropped the spatula. I asked him what on earth he meant. He said his mother had been on the phone in her car, thinking he was asleep in the back seat, and she had said the words cognitive decline and guardianship and before. She gives it all away to some charity. Jack did not fully understand what those words meant, but he understood the tone. He understood that his mother was talking about me like I was a problem to be solved, an obstacle between her and something she wanted. I held that sweet boy's face in my hands, and I told him his grandmother's brain was just fine, that I loved him more than anything on this earth, and that everything was going to be all right. He looked at me the way children look at you when they are trying to decide whether to believe in adults' reassurance or their own guts, and then he wrapped his arms around my waist and pressed his face into my apron the way he used to when he was small enough to fit there entirely, and he said, I don't want you to go anywhere. Grandma, I told him I was not going anywhere. I promised him that. And I want you to know, whatever else happened after that day, I never once let that promise become a lie. After he finished his sandwich and went outside to shoot baskets in the driveway, humming to himself, already halfway back to being a carefree 12-year-old boy. I went to my study, closed the door, and I sat with my hands folded on my desk for a very long time. I did not cry, though I wanted to. I did not call Patrick, though every instinct told me to. I sat there and I let the anger settle into something useful, something with edges and direction, because a woman does not raise a son alone, does not survive being left with a 6-year-old and no money and a stack of unpaid bills on a kitchen counter, does not build a $12 million life out of a card table in a 1-bedroom apartment by being weak when it matters most. I had been weak, patient, accommodating for years where Jenna was concerned. That chapter, sitting in my study that afternoon, quietly closed itself. I called Corinne first thing the next morning. She's trying to have me declared incompetent, I said. She's laying groundwork for a guardianship petition. Corinne was quiet for a moment, and then she said something I will never forget. Adele, this is actually good news. Because a woman who is stupid enough to say the words cognitive decline out loud in a car, with her own child in the back seat, is a woman who is going to make mistakes, and we are going to be ready for every single one of them. So we got ready. The first thing we did was finalize the irrevocable trust I had already been building for 2 years, tightening every clause Corinne could think of, adding the exact language about forfeiture that I would later stand up and read aloud at my own dinner table. We moved the deed to the house, the ownership of my firm, and every investment account I held into that trust within 11 days. All of it done quietly, all of it done through Corinne's office rather than my own. so that nothing would show up on any shared document Jenna might still be able to access. I remember signing that final stack of papers at Corinne's conference table, my pen moving across page after page, and feeling for the first time in months like I was standing on solid ground again instead of sand. I confided in exactly one other person during that time, my oldest friend, a woman named Harriet, who I have known since we were both young mothers pushing strollers around the same park 40 years ago, back when neither of us owned much more than the clothes on our backs and a stubborn refusal to quit. I sat in her kitchen one afternoon and told her everything, the photographs on the phone, the words cognitive decline overheard by a 12-year-old in the back seat of a car, all of it. And Harriet, who has never in her life minced words, set down her coffee cup and said, "Adele Winthrop, you built an empire out of a card table. You are not about to let some girl who married into comfort take it from you while pretending it's for your own good. You go get her." I laughed for the first time in weeks that afternoon. A real laugh, and I think that laugh is what finally settled the last of the fear in me and left only the resolve. For the next month, I played my part beautifully. I want you to understand, I have never in my life been a liar. I have never in my life set out to deceive people I love, but Jenna Holcomb had made herself my adversary. And when a woman declares war on you in your own home, you do not sit there politely waiting to be conquered. I let her think I was slipping. I misplaced my reading glasses in front of her twice. I forgot a doctor's appointment I had actually rescheduled on purpose. I let her walk me through my own kitchen cabinets one afternoon, just to help me stay organized, and I thanked her sweetly the entire time. All while Corinne, on the other end of a plan neither Patrick nor Jenna knew existed, was quietly finalizing paperwork that would make Jenna's little scheme not just fail, but explode in her face. Meanwhile, Corinne had one of her associates do some very quiet, very legal digging. And what we found explained a great deal. Jenna Holcomb was drowning in debt. Not a little debt. Not the kind of debt a young family accumulates from a mortgage and a car payment. I mean real serious secret debt. Nearly $200,000 of it. Spread across 4 credit cards and a private loan Patrick did not know existed. All of it hidden behind a storage unit rented under her maiden name. Filled with designer handbags and clothes with the tags still on, purchases she had made and never even worn, just to feel, for one single moment in a dressing room, like the kind of woman she believed she deserved to be. She was not just after my money because she was greedy in some abstract way. She was drowning, and she had decided, somewhere in that drowning, that the fastest lifeboat available was her mother-in-law's $12 million house. And she intended to get her hands on the keys to that lifeboat one way or another, whether I was alive and inconvenient, or declared incompetent and out of her way. Corinne's associate, a quiet, thorough young man named Devon, laid it all out for us over coffee one Tuesday morning at Corinne's office, sliding printed statements across the table one at a time like a dealer, laying down cards in a game. Only 2 of us knew we were playing. His manner so calm and clinical that it made the contents of those pages feel even more unsettling by contrast. 4 credit cards, each one nearly maxed. Minimum payments made just often enough to avoid default. And behind them a private, personal loan from an online lender, charging an interest, rate that made my stomach turn. Taken out 18 months earlier under Jenna's maiden name. Holcomb, a detail she had clearly chosen on purpose so that nothing would show up if Patrick ever glanced at a shared account or a joint credit report. And then there was the storage unit. Devon had driven out to Route 12 himself, verified the rental agreement through public. Filing records, nothing invasive, nothing illegal, simply careful, patient documentation. Unit 2F14 rented for 3 years. Climate controlled because, as Devon dryly noted, glancing up from his notes with the faintest trace of a smile, apparently the handbags needed it more than the woman renting them did. I sat there in Corinne's office, looking at photographs of receipts for things, Jenna had bought and never once worn in front of any of us, never carried to a single dinner, a single school function, a single holiday, purchases made purely, it seemed, for the private, secret comfort of owning them, and I understood, in a way that genuinely surprised me, that I was not looking at a villain in a movie. I was looking at a woman who had built an entire second life out of desperation and shame, hidden in a 10 by 10 storage unit off a highway, because somewhere in her own history she had learned that being seen as anything less than perfect, less than wealthy, less than in control was unbearable. I will not pretend that finding this out did not break my heart a little, even through the anger, because underneath the woman who called me broke while drinking my wine, there was a frightened, desperate person who had built a life out of appearances, because somewhere along the way, she had decided that appearances were the only thing that made her worth loving. I did not excuse what she was doing to me, but I understood it, and understanding a person does not mean you let them destroy you. We set the trap for Jack's next birthday party, actually, no. I am getting ahead of myself. Let me back up just slightly so you understand exactly how this played out. Because I promised you a story, not just a summary, and you deserve to see this the way I lived it. Corinne and I decided the best move was not to hide from Jenna's plan, but to let it fully happen, out in the open in front of witnesses, so that when it collapsed, it would collapse completely and publicly, leaving her no room to spin it, no room to cry victim, no room to turn my own son against. Me with some sympathetic story about a confused, old woman who couldn't handle the confrontation. Corinne had warned me that Jenna would likely try to engineer some kind of natural observation before ever filing the actual petition. Something informal enough that it would not spook the family, but official sounding, enough that it could be cited later. A friend who happens to be a doctor. A casual outing where I might seem confused in front of witnesses. Anything that would let her build a case, without ever having to formally request an evaluation I might refuse. So we waited and we watched, and sure enough, 3 weeks later, Jenna called me on a Tuesday morning, her voice bright and warm in a way that had started to make the back of my neck prickle, and suggested we all have a family dinner at my house. A nice big one to celebrate nothing in particular, just a chance for everyone to be together. She wanted to invite her parents too, and almost as an afterthought, mentioned that Patrick's old college roommate, Trent, happened to be in town that weekend. Wouldn't it be fun to have him along? He'd love to see the house. I said yes immediately. I told her it sounded lovely. I even offered to cook, and I meant it, because if Jenna Holcomb was going to stage her little audition in my dining room, I decided she was going to do it while eating the best meal I had made in years. And I was not going to give her a single excuse to say later that Adele seemed off that night, or overwhelmed, or anything less than entirely fully herself. I knew exactly what she was doing the moment she mentioned Trent's name. She was staging an intervention. She was going to have this doctor casually observe me over dinner, ask me a few friendly little questions designed to expose confusion, and then sometime later use his observations as ammunition, an independent witness, an unbiased medical opinion, to support whatever guardianship petition she and her secret lawyer had been drafting. The night of the dinner, my house was full. Patrick, looking tired, but happy the way he always looks when his whole family is under one roof. Jack, practically glowing, so proud to show his friend's father, who had come along too, around Grandma's amazing house, pointing out the pool, the koi pond, the room he called his second bedroom because he stayed over so often. Jenna's parents, a perfectly nice, perfectly oblivious couple who had no idea their daughter was $200,000 in secret debt, arriving with a bottle of wine and a pie, hugging me warmly at the door, calling me Mom the way they always had since the wedding, and the doctor, a soft-spoken man named Trent, an old college roommate of Patrick's, who I had met perhaps twice in 15 years. suddenly and conveniently free that particular Sunday evening. I set the table myself that night. Cloth napkins, the good china, candles down the center, because if I was going to be tested in my own home, I decided I was going to be tested beautifully. Trent sat 2 seats down from me, and all through the appetizers, over the shrimp cocktail I had made from scratch, he began so casually, so gently, asking his strange little questions. What day of the week is it, Adele? Have you had a chance to read anything good lately? Can you tell me the last book you finished? Oh, just curious, no reason, huh? Just making conversation. He asked me to name the current president, framed as some offhand political joke about the news. He asked if I remembered what we had all talked about at Thanksgiving, watching my face carefully while he waited for my answer, the way you watch a poker opponent's hands rather than their words. I answered every single question perfectly, warmly with a small, knowing smile that Jenna mistook for the confused pleasantness of an old woman who had no idea she was being tested. I told him the day of the week and added, just to be generous, that it was also coincidentally the anniversary of the day I signed the lease on my very first design studio, 41 years ago that week. I told him about the biography of Eleanor Roosevelt I had just finished and gave him 3 details from it. The chapter on her time at the United Nations, a quote about courage I had underlined twice, and a small fact about her handwriting that I had found oddly moving. Just to be generous with my answer, I named the president, and I made a joke of my own about the state of the news these days, which made her father laugh out loud and made Jenna's smile tighten just slightly at the corners, because I do not think she expected me to be quite so sharp, quite so composed, quite so clearly entirely myself. She did not know that Corinne was parked 2 streets over in her car, and that Corinne's associate, a young paralegal named Marisol, was seated at my dinner table posing as a friend from my book club, recording every single word on a device no larger than a button. After dinner, I stood up, tapped my wine glass with a fork the way you do before a toast, and I asked everyone to please stay seated for just a few more minutes, because I had something I wanted to share with the family. Jenna's whole face lit up. She thought this was it. She thought I was about to say something that would confirm every fear. Trent had gently planted over the salmon and asparagus. She reached over and squeezed Patrick's hand under the table. I saw it, that little squeeze of anticipation. I said, I want to talk about my will. You could have heard a pin drop in that dining room. I said, as many of you know, I built everything I have from nothing. I've worked every single day of my adult life to give my son, and now my grandson, a future they'll never have to struggle for. And I love this family more than anything on this earth. I looked right at Jack when I said that, and the boy beamed at me. So I've decided it's time to be transparent about my plans, so there's no confusion later. Jenna was practically vibrating with hope in her seat. Everything I own, I continued, the house, the company, my investments, all of it, is being placed into an irrevocable trust, effective as of this past Monday, with my attorney, Corinne Blackwood, as trustee. The trust names my son Patrick and my grandson Jack as the sole beneficiaries. The trust also contains a very specific clause, which Corinne can explain in full legal detail if anyone would like, stating that any attempt by any party, through legal petition, medical evaluation, or any other means, to challenge my competency or my control over my own affairs while I'm alive, will result in that party being permanently and irrevocably removed as a beneficiary or as the spouse of a beneficiary's protected share, with the forfeited portion redirected entirely to charity. I let that sit in the air for a moment. Jenna's smile had not fully collapsed yet. She was still doing the math, still hoping this did not mean what she was starting to understand it meant. I turned to Trent, the very quiet, very pale physician friend, sitting there with his fork halfway to his mouth. Trent, dear, thank you so much for coming tonight, and for all your lovely little questions. I do hope you enjoyed the salmon. I should also mention, Corinne has already been in touch with the state medical board regarding the ethics of a physician conducting an unauthorized, unconsented cognitive evaluation on a private citizen at a dinner party, under false pretenses. For the purpose of supporting a guardianship petition he was not retained to assess. She tells me that's actually a fairly serious violation, isn't it? The kind that shows up on a license review. Trent's fork went down very slowly. He looked at Jenna like a man realizing, in real time, that he had agreed to carry a bag through customs without ever once asking what was inside it. Jenna, he said quietly, you told me this was just a casual dinner. Jenna did not answer him. She was staring at me, and I watched something behind her eyes shift from confidence to a kind of scrambling, calculating panic, the look of a person doing rapid math on how much of the room she had actually lost. Adele, she started, I don't know what you think you... I have the petition, dear, I said, still in that same calm, pleasant voice I use for closing a difficult client meeting. Unsigned, thankfully, still sitting in your attorney's draft folder, filed 3 weeks ago under a firm on Cedar Street. I have the credit card statements. I have the loan documents under your maiden name. And I have the rental agreement for Unit 214 at the storage facility on Route 12, along with an itemized list, provided quite helpfully by the facility manager, of exactly what's inside it. I paused, and I let myself, just once that night, allow a little steel into my voice. You sat on my sofa, Jenna, drinking my wine, and you told me I would die broke. I want you to understand something very clearly, in front of your parents, in front of my son, in front of my grandson. I have never once in 71 years been broke a day in my life that I did not claw my own way back out of. And I am not about to start now, because a woman who cannot manage her own finances decided mine looked easier to steal than to earn. And then I looked at Jenna. I did not raise my voice. I want you to understand that. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not do a single thing that would let her later say, Adele had some kind of episode. Adele got confused and hysterical. Adele proved my point for me. I simply looked at my daughter-in-law, this woman who had sat on my sofa drinking my wine and told me I would die broke. And I said calmly, Jenna, I know about the guardianship petition your attorney drafted 3 weeks ago. I know about the $200,000 in debt you've hidden from my son. I know about the storage unit on Route 12 filled with handbags you've never worn. And I know that tonight was never about a nice family dinner. It was an audition for a courtroom. Patrick's face, I will remember it until the day I die. It went from confusion to disbelief, to a kind of quiet devastation, and then slowly to something harder, something I had not seen in my gentle son's face since he was a teenager standing up to a boy who'd been bullying a classmate. He turned to his wife and said, in a voice so quiet it was almost worse than shouting, Is that true? Jenna tried. God, she tried. She said I was confused. She said this was exactly the kind of paranoid thinking she'd been worried about. She turned to her own parents for support and found only 2 horrified faces staring back at her, because Corinne, ever thorough, had made absolutely sure that every single claim I made that night could be backed up with paper, laid out in a folder she had discreetly handed me before dinner began, tucked inside a leather portfolio I had set beside my chair as though it held nothing more than a guest list. Bank records with the relevant lines highlighted in yellow. A copy of the unsigned guardianship petition, obtained entirely legally through the discovery process once. Corinne had grounds to request it. Even, and this one still gives me a small twinge of guilt, the storage unit rental agreement, complete with the facility manager's itemized inventory attached. Jack, my sweet 12-year-old Jack, sat frozen at that table looking between his parents, and I saw the exact moment he understood that his mother had, on some level, been planning to have his grandmother taken away from him. He started to cry quietly, the way children cry when they are trying very hard to be brave. And that was the moment my heart broke clean in half. Not because of what I had done to Jenna, but because of what Jenna's choices had done to that little boy. The dinner ended the way you would imagine. Jenna's parents left mortified, apologizing to me on their way out the door as though her sins were somehow theirs to carry. Her mother's hands shaking as she gathered her purse, her father unable to meet my eyes. Trent left even faster, already dialing someone, probably his own lawyer, his half-eaten slice of pie abandoned on the table. Jenna herself left too, drove off into the dark in her own car without a word to anyone, and I remember watching her taillights disappear down my long driveway and feeling nothing like triumph, only a strange, hollow exhaustion, the kind that comes after you have carried something heavy for a very long distance and finally get to set it down. Jack, God bless him, I found him in the pool house an hour later, sitting on the little bench in there in the dark, still in his good dinner clothes, hugging his knees. I sat down next to him without turning on the light, and I did not try to explain everything that had happened, because he was 12, not stupid, and he had already understood more of it than any child should have to. I just put my arm around him and let him lean into my side, and we sat there together in the quiet for a long while until Patrick came looking for us both. And Patrick, my Patrick, sat in my living room until nearly 2 a.m. after Jack had finally fallen asleep in his old room down the hall, his head in his hands, asking me questions I did not have easy answers for. "How long have you known?" he asked. "Why didn't you tell me the moment you found out?" And then quieter, the question I think had been sitting underneath all the others the whole night. "What does it say about me, Mom? That I didn't see any of this?" I told him what I believed to be true, that seeing clearly and loving deeply do not always arrive in a person at the same time, that I had raised him to give people the benefit of the doubt, and that this had, this one time, been used against him by someone who understood exactly how good his heart was and built a plan around exploiting it. He was not angry at me for keeping the investigation quiet, not really. Though I think some small part of him wished I had trusted him with it sooner. Mostly he was angry at himself and grieving, right there on my sofa at 2 a.m, a version of his marriage and his family that he had believed in and was now watching come apart in real time, asking himself questions I don't think he had ever let himself ask before. I will not drag out every single detail of the 6 months that followed, but I will tell you the shape of it, because I do not think it is fair to you, after everything I've shared, to skip past the hard parts just because they are less satisfying than the confrontation itself. Patrick did not leave that night, or even that week. My son is not a man who makes big decisions in the heat of anger, and I raised him that way on purpose. What he did instead was quieter and I think harder. He asked Jenna to move into the guest room. He started going to counseling. First alone, then eventually with her, though eventually stretched out over almost 2 months. 2 months where I watched my son age in ways that had nothing to do with birthdays. He would come sit in my kitchen some evenings after dropping Jack off, and he would not say much. He would just sit there at the same island where Jack had told me about the phone call, turning a coffee mug in slow circles, and finally one night he said, "I keep asking myself how I didn't see it. And then I realize I think some part of me did see it, and I just didn't want it to be true, because seeing it meant admitting I built a family on top of something that wasn't solid. I did not have a wise, tidy answer for that. I told him that loving someone and seeing them clearly are 2 different skills, and most of us are better at one than the other. And that did not make him foolish. It made him human, the same as the rest of us. Jack split his nights between 2 houses during that stretch, and I will tell you honestly, it was the hardest part of this entire ordeal to watch. He would arrive at my house somewhat Fridays with his overnight bag and go straight to his room without wanting to talk, and I would hear him crying through the door some nights, trying to be quiet about it, trying so hard to be brave for both of his parents at once, and I would sit on the floor outside that door, my old knees aching against the hardwood, and I would just be there, not always saying anything, just letting him know. Someone was on the other side of the door who was not going anywhere. Jenna lost her job about 10 weeks after that dinner. It was not, as far as I ever learned, a direct result of anything Corinne or I did. We made absolutely certain of that. Everything we handled stayed inside legal channels and inside my own family's walls. But Highland Park is a smaller world than people think, and word travels through country clubs and school pickup lines faster than any lawsuit ever could. And eventually the fallout from a guardianship attempt against a well-known local businesswoman reached people in Jenna's professional circle who quietly decided they did not want their firm's name anywhere near hers. She found herself, for the first time in years, without the job, without the appearance of the life she had spent so much energy and so much secret debt constructing, and without, for a little while, very many people at all in her corner. I would be lying to you if I said I did not feel a hard, cold satisfaction watching her world come apart, the way she had tried to make mine come apart. For a while, I let myself feel it. I am human. I built a life with my own 2 hands, and a woman tried to take it from me while calling me broken. And there is a part of every person, even an old woman who says her prayers every night, that wants to watch a person like that lose. But satisfaction is not the same as peace. And I did not raise my son to grow up watching his grandmother hold a grudge like a weapon forever. About 4 months after that dinner, on a warm evening with the cicadas just starting up in the oaks I had planted decades earlier, Jenna showed up at my house alone, no makeup, hair pulled back plain, wearing a sweatshirt I recognized as one of Patrick's old college ones, looking smaller than I had ever seen her look, smaller than the woman who used to walk through my home like she was already measuring the drapes for herself. She stood on my porch in the evening light, and she did not ask to come in. She just stood there with her arms crossed over her chest like she was holding herself together, and she said, "I don't expect you to forgive me. I just needed you to know that I know what I did. And I know why I did it, and neither of those things make it okay." I stood in the doorway and I let her talk, because I have learned in 70-some years on this earth, and that people rarely say the truest things about themselves unless you give them the silence to fall into. She told me things that night I had not learned from Corinne's investigation, things no bank statement could have shown me. She told me about a mother who measured love in square footage and designer labels, who used to drive her as a girl past the big houses on the good side of their town and say, "Someday, baby, someday," like it was a promise instead of a wound being carved a little deeper each time. She told me about watching that same mother chase a life, just out of reach for 30 years and never once, not one single day feel like enough, and how she had promised herself as a teenager that she would never let herself become a woman standing outside a life looking in. She told me she looked at my home the day she said that terrible thing to me, and she did not see me standing in it at all. She saw an exit, she saw the finish, line to a race her own mother had been running her entire life without ever once crossing it. And for one ugly, honest moment, standing in my living room with a glass of wine in her hand, she had wanted to shove the person in front of her out of the way to reach it. "It's not an excuse," she said, and her voice cracked on the word excuse. "It's not an excuse," she said again, quieter. And then a third time, barely a whisper. "It's not an excuse, Adele, I know that. I just needed you to know it wasn't really about you. It was never really about you. You just happened to be standing where I was aiming." I stood in my doorway for a long time. I thought about Jack, crying at that dinner table. I thought about the strawberry in my hand, and the coldness that had settled into me that day, a coldness I had needed, that had protected me, but that I did not want to carry for the rest of my life. I thought about the woman I have always tried to be, the one who built something out of nothing, without ever letting the world turn her hard and mean the way it could have. I did not let her back into my home that night. I want to be honest about that. Because forgiveness is not the same as forgetting. And it is certainly not the same as pretending nothing happened. I told her that forgiveness, real forgiveness, was something she would have to earn slowly, through years, through actions, not through one raw confession on a porch. But I also told her that I did not want Jack growing up watching the two women in his life at war forever, and that I was willing, if she was serious, to let her prove herself. It has been almost 2 years now, and I want to walk you through what those 2 years actually looked like, because I think the walking through matters more than the summary. Jenna went to therapy, real therapy, twice a week at first, then once a week, the consistent, unglamorous kind that does not photograph well for anyone's social media. The kind where you sit in a small office with a box of tissues on the table and you say the ugly, true things about yourself out loud to a stranger because you have finally run out of places to hide from them. She told me once, much later, that the hardest session of her life was the one where her therapist asked her to describe in detail the exact moment she decided to look up an attorney about guardianship. And she realized, saying it out loud, that she had made that decision on a Tuesday afternoon after seeing a photo online of a friend's newly renovated kitchen, a kitchen that cost less than one wing of my house. And she had felt something close to rage that she did not have that for herself yet. She paid off her debt slowly, on her own, without a cent from me or from Patrick, taking a job at a smaller firm for less money and less prestige than she was used to, driving a car with a check engine light she chose not to fix for 8 months because the fix cost $400, she had decided, for the first time in her adult life, to actually not spend. I will admit, I watched some of that unfold from a careful distance, and there was a part of me, a small, human, unglamorous part, that took a certain grim satisfaction in it. I am not proud of that part of myself, but I promised you honesty tonight, and I intend to keep that promise. She and Patrick did not get back together, not the way some of you might be hoping. Some wounds do not simply heal because a story needs a tidy ending. There was a period, about 8 months in, where they actually tried, went to a marriage counselor together every other week, held hands across a table in a strip, mall office between a nail salon and a tax preparer. And for a while I let myself hope right along with them. But somewhere in that process, they both realized, separately and then together, that too much had been said at that dinner table to fully unsay. That trust, once you have watched it get calculated and weighed, and nearly signed away in a lawyer's office, does not rebuild itself just because two people want it to. They divorced quietly, without lawyers throwing accusations across a courtroom, without a single ugly headline. Because by then, Jenna had nothing left to fight for that was worth fighting dirty over. And Patrick, to his enormous credit, never once used what she had done to me as a weapon in the divorce, even though Corinne told him more than once that he had every legal right to. What they built instead, slowly, deliberately over those 2 years, was something new as parents, respectful, careful, honest in a way their marriage had never quite managed to be. They split, holidays without drama. They showed up to the same soccer games and sat eventually on the same side of the bleachers instead of opposite ends. And Jenna and I, we are not close. Not the way I once hoped a mother and daughter-in-law might be back when Patrick first brought her home for dinner all those years ago. But we are civil. We are, on Jack's birthdays, in the same room, and we are kind to each other, because that boy deserves 2 grown women who love him enough to set their pride down at the door, even when it is the very last thing either of us wants to do. Jack is 14 now, and I want to tell you a little about him too, because a story about revenge and forgiveness that forgets about the child in the middle of it is not a story I am interested in telling. For a long while after that dinner, he was quieter than he used to be, more watchful, the way children get when they have learned too young that the adults around them are capable of things they never expected. He asked me once, maybe 6 months after everything happened, sitting on my back porch watching the sun go down over the pool. Grandma, do you think Mom really would have taken the house from you? And I told him the truth, because I've never once lied to that boy, and I was not about to start over a question that hard. I told him I believed his mother had been scared and desperate in a way that made her do something she was deeply ashamed of, and that being scared does not make a person evil, but it also does not make what she tried to do okay. And both of those things can be true at the same time. He sat with that for a long time, longer than most 14-year-olds would sit with anything. And then he said, I think I get that. Like, I still love her, I'm just still a little mad too. I told him that sounded exactly right to me, that loving someone and being angry with them are not opposites. They can live in the same heart at the same time, sometimes for years, and that there is no shame in letting them both be true. He has grown over these 2 years into a steady, thoughtful young man who spends his summers helping out at my firm, sweeping the design studio floor, sitting in on client meetings when I let him, asking questions about load-bearing, walls, and color theory with the same wide-eyed hunger I once had at that wobbly card table, staying late some evenings just to watch me sketch even, after everyone else has gone home for the day. Some evenings I catch him looking at blueprints spread across my desk with an expression I recognize immediately because I used to see it in the mirror 40 years ago. I do not know if he will choose this life for himself, but I know that whatever he chooses, he will choose it from a place of having watched his grandmother refuse to be erased, and I think that will serve him better than any inheritance ever could. Last month, Jenna came to my house again, this time with Jack, to drop him off for the weekend, and as she was leaving, she paused at the door and she said, Adele, I was wrong. You didn't build all this because you were reckless with money, or because you didn't understand what you had. You built it because you understood exactly what it costs to have nothing, and you never wanted to feel that fear again. I didn't see that back then. I see it now. I will not pretend that did not mean something to me. I will not pretend an old woman's heart does not still ache for the family she wishes she'd had from the beginning, instead of the one she had to fight so hard to protect. I am 73 years old now. I still work 3 days a week, because I love what I built, not because I need to, and because idle hands have never once suited me, not even for a single restless afternoon. I still walk the floor of my own design studio and correct a fabric swatch that isn't quite right, and my younger staff still roll their eyes a little at how particular I am about the placement of a light fixture, and I would not trade that for a single day of sitting still. I still give to my charities, and yes, I plan to give quite a lot of it away before I ever leave this earth. Not because I am careless with what I built, but because I believe the whole entire point of building something is what you get to do with it, who you get to lift up with it, while you are still alive to see their faces when you do. I have already funded 2 scholarships for young women studying design at the local university. Girls who remind me, more than a little, of a certain stubborn, young mother who once sat at a wobbly card table teaching herself everything from library books because nobody else was going to teach her. And I have never, not once, since that dinner heard another word about dying broke. Not a whisper of it, not even a joking reference. And I doubt very much I ever will again. If there is one thing I want you to carry away from this story tonight, it is this. If you are sitting somewhere right now in your own home, in a life you built with your own 2 hands, and someone close to you, someone who is supposed to love you, has started treating your success like it belongs to them simply because they are near it, listen to that feeling in your stomach. Do not talk yourself out of it the way I did for years. Protect what you built. Quietly, legally, thoroughly, long before you ever think you'll need to. Talk to an attorney you trust. Put things in writing while your mind is sound and your hand is steady. Not because you expect the people you love to betray you, but because love should never require you to leave yourself unprotected. And the people who truly love you will never resent you for being wise. And if after protecting yourself, you find that the person who hurt you eventually comes back to your door, smaller, humbled, honestly sorry in a way you can feel in your bones and not just hear in their words, I want you to know that forgiveness does not make you weak. It does not undo the wisdom you gained from protecting yourself in the first place. I forgave Jenna, in my own time, on my own terms, without ever handing back the fortress I built. And both of those things live inside me at once, the forgiveness and the fortress. And I sleep better at night than I ever have in my life, because here is what I know, sitting in my $12 million house that I built with my own 2 hands, that nobody handed to me, that nobody is ever going to take from me while I still have breath in my body. Money was never the real treasure in this house, not once, not for a single day. It was never the marble countertops or the view from the back terrace or the number on a bank statement that a young woman once used to measure my worth. The real treasure has always been that little boy who cried at a dinner table because he was afraid of losing his grandmother, and who still, every single Friday, runs through my front door and yells, "Grandma, I'm home," his backpack sliding off one shoulder, like this house belongs to both of us. Because it does and always will, long after my name is the only thing left of me in this world. I did not die broke. I am not going to die broke. But if I ever do lose everything I built, every dollar, every deed, every last brick of this house, I will still have raised a son who chose honesty over comfort even when it cost him a marriage. And I will still have a grandson who loves me for exactly who I am, scars and steel and all. And no woman sitting on my sofa with a glass of my wine will ever be able to take that away from me, no matter what she calls it, and no matter how sweetly she smiles when she says it. So tell me, from the bottom of my heart, where are you watching this from tonight? Put your city down in the comments. I've read every single one, I promise you I do, sitting right here in my study with my reading glasses on, scrolling through them one by one with a cup of tea beside me. And if this story moved you even a little, if you have a grandmother in your life who built something out of nothing, and never once let the world make her feel small, do this old woman a kindness. Hit that like button. Subscribe if you haven't already, because I have more stories like this one to share with you. And share this with someone who needs to hear tonight that it is never too late to protect what you built, and it's never too weak a thing to forgive the people who tried to take it from you. Thank you for sitting with me tonight, truly, from the bottom of my heart. I'll see you in the next one.